Well, first of all, let me be perfectly clear. Sustainable does not necessarily mean just. More often than not, sustainable policies may contribute to increase social injustice. Combining the increase of everyone's well-being with sustainability is, in fact, one, according to me, of the greatest challenges for transition to sustainability. This challenge is particularly crucial in urban areas, places I know the best. I mean, by 2050, 70% of the world's population will live in cities. And these cities will have to provide services and resources to their inhabitants while reducing pollution. It's not so evident. It's a challenge that requires radically new procedures and technical tools. And it will concern the bulk of the humanity. This procedure and this technical solution can become, paradoxically, a dramatic source of injustice. They can reinforce existing environmental injustices, living conditions, exposure to pollution, or they can create them in the worst case. Look this example. Well, sustainable cities and ecological neighborhoods are, as everybody knows, are mostly inhabited by wealthy people. The reason is simple. In the beginning, these categories were targeted. You know what? Because they could afford the higher construction cost and they were decisive in the formation of new trends. It was supposed to democratize the access to this type of living, as larger demand makes possible lowering construction costs due to economies of scale. You had that way of thinking in the Swedish cases, for example, of Hammarby. However, the fact is that things scarcely worked out. Construction costs pushed up again as developers that were constrained by drastic environmental specification played the style and class card to increase their capital gains. Anyway, as higher as it can be, there is a limited number of ecological dwellings, and the attractiveness is strong. So the law of supply and demand increased the rent rate and the sell rate, regardless what the construction cost is. Clearly, the name of sustainable neighborhood is unappropriated when a neighborhood becomes socially inaccessible. Moreover, there is an issue here that concerns directly social justice. Wouldn't public money, because you have public money invested in these places, wouldn't public money have been more efficient if invested to reduce environmental disparities between existing areas, places where the environmental conditions are already pretty bad? In Paris, there was a study that showed in Ile-de-France a strong correlation between the exposure to pollutants, noise, and things like that, and the poorest people, you know. The spatial divide between wealthy and poor people based on the exposition to environmental nuisances, or conversely, the presence of green amenities has already increased significantly in all types of cities in the world, not only in developed or so-called developed countries. Quite a nice unpolluted living environment has become an emblem in the sense of Bourdieu, and as such, highly attractive and expensive areas. Interestingly, the repulsiveness of environmental degradation is stronger. To determine the residential choice is difficult, you know, to play with the Spanish, Irish, French. Is stronger to determine the residential choice than the attractiveness of environmental amenities. And that's quite interesting because, in fact, the avoidance behavior decides the bulk of environmental injustice. Thus, the matter is, if the supposed attractiveness due to exemplary occasional programs is less decisive than the repulsiveness of some areas to explain social and environmental injustice distribution, then sustainable policies should focus on a global approach rather than to keep on exemplary one. You have a very nice example. Well, it doesn't work anyway, or some of them work. But, I mean, even if it worked, maybe they don't answer to the real needs of people there. Urban areas give some insight into a more general phenomenon where environmental policies turn out to be totally disconnected from the needs and expectations of inhabitants. When they reduce their scope to technical issues that proceed from intergenerational equity, limited to a biophysical, energetic, or ecosystem constraint, at the expense of other priorities regarding spatial equities. For example, this matter of environmental justice, living conditions, landscape diversity. Moreover, there is a social side effect of these technical solutions. These exemplary actions and policies are often favored to the detriment of more holistic approaches, such as active land management or transformation of the social fabric, as it was shown by Burton, for example, in a lot of papers. And these were not at all the original intentions of our Common Future report. Sustainable development originally aims at fostering both spatial and intergenerational solidarity and equity, which is all but evident. Now, in favoring a restrictive approach to eco-technologies or normative process, spatial equity is more than often sacrificed to intergenerational equity. And here comes the dilemma of imported sustainability. An effective sustainable policy should take into account all the relations between human beings and the environment where they live. As a matter of consequence, sustainability issues have to redefine its designs and means, namely, it has to think sustainability in a spatial scale large enough to consider imported sustainability. When a place guarantees its own sustainable development by making other areas pay the cost of it, one can speak of imported sustainability. It's transferring pollution, exporting waste or polluting activities, siphoning the resources, and so on. This place complies apparently with the general conditions of sustainability because its nuisances are exported. Imported sustainability is a major bias nowadays against an effective implementation of sustainable policies. It is very tricky to deal with this problem since if we want to define a study area large enough to include imported sustainability, its limits will differ according to which aspects of sustainability we focus on. The functional area of the employment and the employment area of a major industrial center do not coincide, nor do they with the geographical area affected by the pollution, physical, chemical, air and water, and nuisances that are due to this industrial center, of course. We've seen that years ago with acid rain, for example, 20 or 30 years ago. It entails, if you want to take the urban side, for example, considering sustainable urban policies on extensive spatial scale that include suburban, peri-urban, and dependent rural and natural areas, which means we have to think sustainability at a regional scale. Can I suggest here that there is an interesting similarity here with Amartya Sen's finding that in Bengal famines were not only due to lack of food, but also to the inequalities caused by the mechanism of food distribution. The issue of capability differences systematically arise the question of who benefits from sustainable development. When imported sustainability exists, injustice materialize spatially from an area to another, as well as between people and communities living in the same area. It means that efficient governance to foster transition to sustainability should focus on the sharp process of spatial differentiation and manifold conflicts and trade-off, which are political matters, between sustainability and social or spatial justice. And this thing that imported sustainability highlights. It demands to address three nested scales simultaneously. The scale of the neighborhood is the first one, a place-based level. Then clusters of adjacent neighborhoods working together at more global policies is the second one. It is the level of the agglomeration in urban planning, for example. It gives good insight of the urban policies on the one side and of the urban lifestyles on the other side. The regional scale is the third one. It is crucial to describe imported sustainability since it is supposed to encompass a significant part of the environmental footprint. Well, that's very good, very nice, but determining concretely this three scale is really tricky. Any areas are covered with overlapping partitions. Each administration, each economic actor, each local community produce its own zoning and its own limits. And so-called sustainable policies can have terrible effects when they do not take into account scale linkages. Scale linkage. So, beyond their procedural and prescriptive appearance, sustainable policies result from the confrontation or the synergy of choices made by a myriad of actors, each acting for its own concern, its own world vision, and its own short-term interests. Thus, it is necessary first to understand what are the determinants of these choices. There's two big issues here. On the institutional side, it is difficult to encompass all the actors, even more to visualize the whole of their interactions. Moreover, none of the actors has access to all the information. He takes his decision on the basis of available information, especially and temporarily close to him. Second issue, on the people's and local communities side, micro-decisions made by individuals and households have indirectly a huge influence on collective decisions. They are very influenced by the moment and the economic status of the person, depending on whether at moment T you feel or really yourself poor or not. You will not make the same choice. If you are placed in the alternative of eating properly or going to the theater, thermally insulating your house or paying your bills. So these personal choices will have a big effect on the efficiency of sustainable policy at local level. Then ostentatious choices also play a big role. The social totem of Robert Frank, for example. Thus, to which point having a house of 1,500 square meters give you more happiness than one of 1,000 square meters, which is already enormous. I mean, my house is not 1,000 square meters. Not much more. But you need to keep up with the Joneses to conform with the social codes, and because the demand is there, the size of house keeps rising inexorably. And this accelerates the urban sprawl while denying more and more people to house themselves properly. To consider these pitfalls, since effective sustainable policies depend on their collective appropriation, it is necessary to include among local actors, because of this phenomenon, non-market institutions, local communities and individuals able to form self-determined user association. The idea is to transcribe in urban planning or in sustainable planning Elinor Ostrom's work, which showed that users communities with neighborhood governance can manage commons more efficiently than the market or institutional structures. So, sustainable policy should address the existing and social and cultural fabric. Thus, its effectiveness is largely dependent on its acceptability. It is therefore important to determine what is good environment for the communities involved, one in which the improvement of environmental conditions stricto sensu, water, quality, air, biodiversity, prudent use of resources, land and energy, will lead to improved living conditions. One in which technical devices and ecological process include in areas large enough to take into account imported sustainability will be able to lead to new lifestyles. Well, the fact is that the environment, far from being pure transcendence, is embedded in the societies. The human being builds a representation of the ecosystems they live in and calls it environment. Out of what? Out of the uses he makes of the resources, taking usage of air, water, mineral, inputs with pollution, or alterations. Depending on the moment, in a society history, all the items present in the ecosystems it occupies are not necessarily converted into resources. The knowledge we have of our environment changed continually. The medieval nature was not the same as ours, if only because they didn't know the dynamics of atmosphere or genetics, for example. These environments represent, finally, our environment now. More or less noisy neighborhood to which we have to adapt. Just consider that a polluted environment can be a place where life is good. I mean, people pay the big buck, you know, to live in the center of Manhattan or Paris or Rome. Okay. Who can tell me that these places are unpolluted and quiet places? They are not. Conversely, an environment with clean air and clean water can be quite untenable, as evidenced by windswept, high-density social housing complexes settled in the middle of nowhere. You know, in Villers-le-Bel, the air is pure and the water is good. Well, I don't know why people don't feel well there. Okay, to determine what there is a gap, between the real environmental nuisances and pollutions and the perception of quality of life. To determine what a good environment is, it's necessary to arbitrate between intergenerational equities, I mean preserving resources for future generations, and spatial equity, taking into account important sustainability, taking into account environmental justice, life conditions. Implementing sustainable developments led to permanent dilemmas, which generate radically different policies according to the balance between equities. To combine sustainability issues and social justice, it's necessary first to understand what determines these choices and how they articulate. The recurring question of which coordination mechanisms are needed at the local, regional, national, or international scale is central here. So the notion of good environment is ambiguous enough to need a clear definition beforehand every time before building every sustainable program, at the risk otherwise of very negative side effects. It should be noted, for example, just to give a small example from here, that French espaces verts, green areas, do not necessarily bring people together. They never did. They also isolate people because they separate their homes. And if you go in peri-urban zones nearby Paris, you will see these wonderful tuya hedges, you know. They're just cut very well and you don't see your neighbor there, you know. They isolate people. This aspect is in line with the Parisian history. Just remember the introduction of greenery by Haussmann was an attempt to control the use of public space by a technical approach based first on hygienism. Its main function was to bring more sunlight to the city and better the air circulation. At the same time, the city life was marked by social-spatial differentiation, which was virtually segregative, embodied in a type of revegetation reduced to espace vert. The very term espace vert reveals its own nature. There's no more an old urban garden, it's no more an urban park. It's deprived from all its positive attributes. The espace vert is no longer a place, but rather an indistinct area whose boundaries are decided in the abstract world of the master plans. Nowadays, with the tram verte, the same logic remains. To separate, to distinguish, to hide. The current Paris Regional Master Plan proposes, as an important means to foster sustainability, a quantitative objective of 10 square meters of public green area per inhabitant at the communal level. Great! If you have 10 square meters of something green with, I don't know, cabbages or lawn or I don't know what else you choose, then you live in a green and friendly environment. It's a joke, right? I thought it was sufficient to display green to become suddenly sustainable. In fact, many work exists about environmental justice, but very few consider that sustainable development can paradoxically jeopardize it. To combine social justice with sustainability, it is necessary to focus more on the social process of decision making. It means combining individual and collective practices, planning options, public policies, lobbying, and group of person activities all together. And that's it. As you see, I've been short enough. And so we have plenty of room for questions. I'm sorry, I was a bit tired, so I had my tongue that moved a lot in all senses. Yeah, John.
Well, thanks a lot for thanks a lot for this very thought-provoking, as usual, presentation. I have a question regarding. So you speak basically when you speak about importer sustainability, exporter sustainability, about equilibrium. Like the first question is, do you think that there is like the balance of imports and exports? There is a configuration that could push the ecological footprint down. Do you think that there is a particular configuration of social balance that could bring the ecological footprint down? To be more explicit, do you think that if we lived in a more equitable society, the ecological footprint would go down? Or do you think that if we lived in a society that's more urbanized, so more polar, the footprint would go down? Or do you think, conversely, that if we lived in a global city where there's no distinction between urban and rural, the footprint will go down? And how to, if you think that there is such balance, which devices do you think we could develop or are there to identify these balances?
Yeah, it's a big program. Well, first of all, and it's a way of answering this question, I think by definition, and I agree with François Cher on this matter, a city cannot be sustainable per se, because the urban metabolism make obvious that it has to get a kind of hinterland, a place where it can export its nuisances and get some resources. So it would be silly for me to think that a global city is a good place for that, because we have to think a much wider area. Now, what is the solution here? I don't think I can tell you right now, well, this is the solution. Well, every case is different. Every case is different. And when we want to delimit, you know, to say what encompasses the area where we want to think sustainability, when do we stop? I mean, for example, do we have to consider the diet of the pilot of the plane, what he has eaten in calories, I don't know, in Rio, for example, before transporting people to the place where they live? Obviously not. But mathematically, we should. You know? So we have to make a decision. And it's almost the same thing that what you did before with the water basin. I mean, it's a political decision. So we have to see, I mean, the system should be, according to me, to put the local communities around the table and the people and deciders too and say, okay, what is trying to take into account sustainability? What is the area when it is supposed to, well, you know? There is some interesting work, you know, it was Champagne-Ardenne that did it with Bien about the way Paris was furnished in food from all the France, and you had a lot of maps that show the configuration. So here you have data, for example, on that. Then you have deciders and political people, or you have local communities. And think about that. How we can try to give a realistic and acceptable configuration that will take into account imported sustainability, knowing very well that there will be a ratio that we can take into account. And then, what if we try to see inside these areas how it works? And now it's another question, you know, what system of governance we play there, how we manage this sustainability and the disbalance between this area and how we compensate all that thing. But now, according to me, we're in the phase where we have to experiment that and to make a kind of catalog of this situation, and then try to find what is common between this situation to build a real framework. But at this phase, I cannot tell you if there are small cities, medium cities, or what I know, what I'm sure of, this I'm sure of that, is that the area will include all kind of fabric with natural places, agricultural one, cities with high density, low density, that I'm quite sure. They need a big diversity, but I cannot tell exactly what will be the limits of this. I don't know if I answer your question more or less. Okay. Qui c'est qui... Il n'y a personne avec le micro, là? Ce serait bien, parce que là, je ne peux pas gérer la parole et le micro en même temps.
Thank you, François. I like the point about ensuring that sustainability policies or strategies or whatever have to reflect and take into account the places where people live and their dynamic and their values. And that has to do with sustainability. I mean, it's not that it has to take into account of it. It is part of sustainability. The other thing that concerns me generally, and you know I've been working on the urban fringe for a long time, and I was going to ask Sharon some questions, but time is real short. I don't know how to pose the question, but I can make a statement of what I think after having spent close to more than 40 years doing this. And that is that many of our problems the enjeux that we have to deal with are actually created to a large extent by different levels of government. If you look at urban sprawl, for instance, in North America, part of it is created by local municipalities trying to attract business and industry. Why? Because people have moved out to live there, and characteristically in North America, a good part of local revenue comes from property taxes. But residential property taxes, except for really high value property, does not cover the costs of servicing. So who covers the cost of servicing? Business, commerce, and industry. So they attract commerce and industry. And so you get this sort of almost planned, unplanned structure. And then what happens? The provincial government, and sometimes the federal government, although it's mainly a provincial responsibility in Canada, improve roads. Constantly improve roads. Well, not so constantly in Quebec. There's lots of potholes in roads in Quebec. But at any rate, let's say they do. And in order to make it easier for people from outlying towns and villages to move in to work in the suburbs. Very unsustainable. And some of the Ministry in Ontario, the Ministry of whatever, so about 20 years ago said, well, we know people are having difficulty buying houses and apartments in the Toronto region, and goodness knows there are close to 3 million just in the agglomeration. So don't worry, folks. What we're going to do is we're going to build super fast highways right out into the countryside to facilitate you burning up energy and using your time unproductively and all the rest of it. And so we've got constant examples of how planning is always maybe 5, 10, 15, 20 years behind what people, other people have been thinking about. And then I think the other concern that I have, and I've had this, said it at a number of places and written about it a bit, is that this metropolitanization that you talked about, large urban centres, it's not natural. It's created by us. And it's facilitated by our government. When I worked for a consulting project for the Economic Development Canada on rural development, I was interested in what they were doing to help rural areas. And I saw there was an interesting program called Strategic Innovation Program. And I thought, my goodness, isn't that interesting? Since they'd asked me to do the analysis, and I said, okay, well, who benefits from it? Because nobody says anything anymore about who benefits or what areas benefit. Well, 2 areas benefit in Quebec. Montreal, and to a lesser extent, Quebec City, and it's shared amongst a handful of big companies. So ho-ho, what about all the innovative possibilities that come out from small and medium-sized business? Doesn't make sense. We know that small and medium-sized business as well in North America for 30 or 40 years are the biggest net creators of employment in contrast to the large corporations. So, and so we have constantly, our governments, emphasized metropolitan areas or large urban centers. Sometimes not intentionally, but look at what happened after the crisis, the economic crisis. We spend money to create employment, generate income. All this is wonderful. And what centers benefit? It's the big urban centers, the metropolitan centers. Montreal used it to catch up on about 30 years of not having spent money properly on maintaining its infrastructure. So it's doing it all in 2 years, 2 or 3 years. I mean, and all that does is it discriminates against rural areas where the employment levels were high and unemployment levels were higher, and increases the attractiveness of the larger urban centres and encourages migration. But a lot of those people that migrate don't find a better quality of life. There are many places in Montreal which are characterized by people who migrated from other parts of Quebec, and they don't have a great quality of life, I can assure you, even if they have parks as opposed to green spaces next to them. So, I mean, it's a bit of a concern that we expect, we have to expect policy to come out, and it has to be helpful, so that's why I think we have to make sure that it's co-constructed and that it reflects the specificities of different territories and different places, different cultures. But it's tough because we're talking about a lot of the people, the actors over the last 100 years who created the silly problems.
Well,
And we're expecting them to solve them? I mean, that's...
yeah. Well, I don't know what to answer because it was not really a question. But, well, I've got an idea now. Next elections, I present myself, so maybe we'll do the things right. Well, not seriously. I'm not... Salut. I'm not a political... I'm not elected anywhere, you know, but the point is, of course, you're right, but I remember this experiment, you know, where you take people that don't know each other and you put them in a train and then you tell them the train is in flame and there's fire. So they kill each other, you know, they trample one on the other, and it's a real disaster. So you take these people and they live together and they know each other and they consider themselves as members of the humanity, and maybe they try to cooperate, and then things are quite different. So the idea of imported sustainability and having area large enough is to tell to the politics, hey, listen, the matter is not that this place has to gain, we have to think this as a whole. And this means a big transformation in the institutional structure and with decisional powers. We had that in 1999 in France when they tried the yellow ADDT. It was not really efficient, but the idea of the pays, of the agglomeration, was that. They had no real powers. But the idea is to tell you, if you don't think sustainability in area large enough, and if all the actors are not around the same table and try to find solutions, then we will have problems. And it's absolutely normal that a mayor of a small city, he has to find some resources. So if there's an industry that come here, of course he will accept it. And why would it not accept if there's some solidarity with other communes and so on within an area large enough? So I'm just proposing, you know, then it's a long way to this. And I mean, I'm always quoting Elinor Ostrom's work, but be realistic. There's a big difference between a commune or a quartier, for example, and an association of lobsters, fishermen, you know, that live together in small communities and have their interest to preserve. And, for example, you know, it is quite different. So much more difficult in this point. But and we know perfectly well, Rajendra Pachauri was here before, that when we try to evolve in one direction, you have 10 people that push you in the other direction. You know, when there is a French comics, Le Concombre Masqué, Mask Concombre, and in one of his big volumes, he wants to be master of the world. So he finds the motto that can give him the stamina to be master of the world. And is, well, I don't translate, I tell it in French, dans un pays de sophistes, seuls les cyclistes pédalent, les autres freinent. And, well, I think in our world, when you try to start going in one way, you have a lot of people in front of you that are not interested in what you do. Whatever are your intentions, you know. There's kind of big inertia.
I have just a short question, and I don't want the answer now.
Okay. Sit together with the champagne.
My question is only, how do we continue this cooperation and the kind of discussion that we had during 2 days? My suggestion would be that before probably the next rencontre next year, we had some exchange about the substance of the discussion, what should be the main themes to be discussed, and that could be made by internationally.
Yeah, sure.
That's my practical discussion, that's all.
Yeah, I even can answer you right now, because we were discussing yesterday about creating a real steering committee with the people that are inside this event for the last 2 years, and to have a discussion on Skype and so on to prepare the next step. Because we have the TERI now, the Energy and Research Institute, and we have the UNITAR now, and we have to... Okay, we're growing.
And thank you for everything.
Yeah, becoming adult. It's a big responsibility. Okay, another question? I made it short so that there could be a lot of questions.
Short question for...
Yeah.
Here?
Yeah, come on. Go ahead.
I think the title you have there, quelle organisation sociale des processus de prise de décision, comes to the key issue. Because we are rich societies. We have a huge level of information, statistics, etc. on our problems. We have all the possible technologies. And yet we're not managing to make things work. I mean, this is impressive. And more, if you make research with people, what they want decent things. I mean, it corresponds to what people want. And in some way, the whole process becomes twisted in such a way that we build the absurd suburbs and the absurd urbanization and the polluted waters and so forth and so forth. So it's just a suggestion concerning that you had hinted that we would have a publication being drawn up from this. For me, this line, let's say, of you've taken in your analysis, which is how do we change the decision-making process, I suggest it would be a key line, let's say, for our work. Thanks, Francois. You worked quite a lot. I think you deserve a good set of applause from all of us.
Thank you. Thank you so much.